All right, guys. So this is video number 3, and this is unit 1.2, which is historic documents. So in 1.1, we kind of talked about just government systems. In 1.2, we're finally going to get into the meat and the potatoes of when the United States was formed. So as you can see on the screen, we're going to talk about the Declaration of Independence. We're going to talk about my main man, Nick Cage, because he stole the Declaration of Independence in order to save it from Sean Bean's character. Sean Bean goes to jail. If you haven't seen National Treasure, it's on Netflix. Fantastic film, historically accurate, 100%. Oh, no. There we go. All right, so the United States government wasn't formed yet. We were British colonies and French and Spanish, things like that. But for the purposes of what we're talking about, we're going to talk about the British colonies. So for more than 100 years, the colonists were happy being British subjects. British treated them well. It was a great time. Everybody was making money. Everybody was living peacefully. Awesome. And there were two events that ultimately altered the way the colonies would interact with the British government. King George III becomes king, obviously. He gets crowned as king, and the French and Indian War. And these two things happen around the same time. So the French and Indian War was basically where the French had allied themselves with the Native Americans that the colonists had been pushing out of their original settlements. And the French, who were picking fights with the British overseas, decided, hey, we'll take this to the colonies and we'll attack them where they're making all their money. And the colonists were the ones paying the price for this. They were the ones getting attacked by the British or by the French. Sorry, excuse me. This conflict was located mostly in western Pennsylvania and most of what is today Ohio. So you can pretty much drive anywhere in Ohio and you will find a historic site that's related to the French and Indian War. And this is known as the 7 Years' War when we talk about it. Like in world history, when we're talking about the British and French, it's called the 7 Years' War. It had become super expensive for the British Empire to defend the colonies, and they eventually won the war against the French. They pushed the French and their Native American allies kind of out of the colonies, and the British crown, King George III, saying, hey, it was super expensive to defend you guys, so you're going to have to pay us back. We're going to up your taxes so that we can pay for all the stuff that we spent trying to defend you. Colonists were not super thrilled about this. Colonists get real mad. King George III decided the colonists would pay their debt through increased taxes, and he decided that since he already had an army in the colonies from the French and Indian War, he would just leave the army there and basically hold the colonists at gunpoint until they paid their higher taxes. And this led to a lot of tension. A lot of people were very unhappy about this because the colonists had been existing almost on their own, and now the government was deciding to come down really hard and heavy on them, and they didn't like that. So eventually the Americans, they're a little ticked off, and they decide they're going to resist just a little bit just to see if they can get the king off their back. At no point at this time were the Americans talking about revolution. They were just saying, hey, you guys need to give us some space. They send a petition to King George III. Petition is basically a letter saying, hey, please stop doing this. King George III pretty much ignored it, threw it in the trash, and the colonists began taking a little bit more of an organized step towards resisting the British. Stamp Act of 1765. If you're not looking at this in class, there's some like group work that we'd be doing around this. I would just look up the Stamp Act of 1765 and put it in your individual notes, star it, highlight it, whatever you got to do. Same with the Townsend Acts, coercive and tolerable acts. Quartering Act, we can talk about real fast. Basically, if you look at the Third Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, it says no quartering of troops, and that is because the British government forced colonists to house citizens or house soldiers and feed them and take care of them and clean their clothes for absolutely no reimbursement. So the British soldiers could come live in your house, eat all of your food, and the British government wouldn't pay you back, and that would suck. So we get to July 4th, 1776. You can see that we're talking about breaking up via text, which is what the Declaration of Independence was. It was, break up via text because we didn't have phones back then. 56 people signed the Declaration of Independence. King George III did not react publicly to the Declaration until October 31st. Granted, it took about 3 months to get stuff from from the colonies to the British island, but still he waited quite a while before he responded to it. and they published it in the colonies in newspapers, and it actually led to a riot in New York City. The people in New York thought, oh man, it's on, like we're getting rid of the British, and they started a riot, and it led to a lot of fighting on the island of New York. But basically this Declaration of Independence, too far. Basically the Declaration of Independence listed out in detail all of these bad things that King George III had done to the colonists. And basically they said, we're breaking up with you, we're going to become our own country, and we don't need you anymore. King George III wasn't really happy about that because the colonies were a huge cash cow for the British Empire. So, what is our government based on after this American Revolution happens? So, we're not really going to spend a lot of time talking about the revolution itself because you would have already covered that in another class. That's not what we're doing here. So, what's the American government all about? After this declaration, after the revolution, and we start figuring stuff out, what is it that we're trying to do? So we need to talk about government and the rule of law. So any government, minus dictatorships, because they take everything they want anyways, must respect the rule of law. And this is this idea that no one person is above the law. So if Donald J. Trump hits somebody with his car and kills somebody, he's going to be prosecuted for manslaughter, just the same as you or I would. Any government official can be tried for a crime with certain exceptions, but they can be tried for their crimes and removed from office. And it's because no one person's above the rule of law. The rule of law is this guideline, this principle that the government and the population live by. And basically it means that if everybody's living by the rule of law, we're all respecting each other's human rights and our rights as citizens of the United States, and everybody's happy. There is no black and white rule of law because humans do not operate in black or white. We all operate in areas of gray. And it's the same with the government. It's the same with the rule of law. What might be applicable to one person is not to the other, and not because it's not been written that way, but it's because imperfect human beings enforce it that way. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Limited government. When governments respect the rule of law and they adhere to popular sovereignty, that's known as limited government. It means the government's not the one in control. It means the people are, and the law is. And this means that government only does what the people says it can do. Because in theory, the government only rules with our consent. We say yes. By agreeing to be in the United States, and the United States elected Donald Trump, we agree to be governed by his administration and by the Congress that we've elected. We've agreed to that. Whether you voted for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Gary Johnson, you agreed that by participating in the political process in the United States that you would accept whoever won. So if Donald Trump would have lost and Hillary Clinton would have won, we would be in the exact same position that no matter who you voted for, you're still listening to what that person has to say. You don't have to agree with it, but you still have to follow the laws that America has set forth. Popular sovereignty and limited government, we talked about that. Moving on, representative government. So we talked about this a little bit in the last video. If you're in a limited government and you're popular, if you're led by popular sovereignty, this leads to this idea of representative government, that we as people would elect the politicians that we want to make decisions on our behalf. We're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I can't go to Washington, D.C. every week and vote on a new law, right? I'm going to elect somebody to do that for me. This representative government idea is that we're going to elect people that agree with what we agree with, and they're going to carry out whatever that popular opinion is in the federal government. So if I vote for Mike Turner, who's a congressional representative for the state of Ohio, if I vote for him, that means I agree enough with his point of view that I think we jive enough that he's going to represent me faithfully in Congress in Washington, D.C., and that he's going to vote for the things that I would vote for if I were there. Does it always happen that way? No, but that's the hope, that's the theory, that's what we do. Obviously this says group project, so if you're not in class, if you're catching up with this video, this isn't really going to apply to you. If it does, and you're watching this video and you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to come see me. So we have some excerpts from the Declaration, which we'll talk about later. These are kind of things I'd like you to look at on your own. talking about after the American Revolution, you've got these newly united colonies. They're free from the British oppressors. They've freed themselves from the people who are holding them down. And they're trying to figure out what the next step is because they kind of didn't think they would get this far. And basically, during a really brief period of time after the revolution ends, each of the 13 colonies start acting as their own country. So you couldn't just travel from New York to Georgia because that would be like going from the United States to Canada. Like there were certain procedures in place that you had to follow. But they realized pretty quickly that this was a bad idea if they wanted to keep the British out of their colonies because the British weren't expelled from North America. They still owned huge chunks of what is now the United States, like west of the Mississippi, and they also owned large chunks of Canada. So we were no way out of the woods yet with the British Empire. Next video, we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. If not, shoot me an email, come talk to me in class, whatever you need to do, let me know. Thanks.